The stagecoach lurched to a halt, wheels grinding against the dusty Arizona soil. Sarah Mitchell's hands trembled as she adjusted her heavy veil, making sure it covered every inch of her face. The driver's voice rang out, announcing their arrival at Pine Valley Settlement. Her heart raced wildly beneath her high-necked blouse. This place, a dot on the map where nobody knew her name or her past, was her last chance at a life beyond. Whispers and horrified stares. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. She was the only survivor in her Boston neighborhood when smallpox swept through like a vengeful ghost. While others perished in fevered agony, Sarah had lived. But survival came with a terrible price. Her once smooth skin now bore the unmistakable, pitted scars of the disease, deep and permanent reminders of her brush with death. In Boston, they called her marked by the devil. Children were hurried away when she passed. Here, in this frontier settlement, she prayed for mercy, for understanding, for a chance to simply exist without being a monster in others' eyes. Pine Valley emerged through a haze of dust, a collection of wooden structures nestled at the foot of towering mountains, surrounded by ponderosa pines that gave the settlement its name. Sarah stepped down carefully, keeping her gloved hands steady on the rail. The spring air carried the scent of pine and wood smoke, so different from Boston's coal-heavy atmosphere. "You'll be wanting the Valley Inn," the driver said, not unkindly, as he handed down her modest trunk. "Hannah Cooper runs it. Decent woman, fair prices." He gestured toward a two-story building with a wide porch. Sarah nodded gratefully, her voice trapped behind the veil. As she made her way across the rutted main street, she felt the weight of curious stares. New arrivals were uncommon in such isolated places. Her letter of introduction to William Jenkins, the town's prominent merchant, felt heavy in her pocket. He had advertised back east for a schoolteacher, unmarried, educated, of good character. Sarah had been all those things before the disease. She prayed her qualifications would matter more than her appearance. The inn's interior was clean and modest. Hannah Cooper looked up from her ledger, eyes widening slightly at the veiled figure before her. "I've just arrived on the afternoon stage," Sarah said softly. "I need accommodations while I settle my affairs." Hannah's smile was polite but guarded. "Of course, we don't get many single ladies traveling alone. What brings you to Pine Valley?" "The teaching position, with Mr. Jenkins." Hannah's expression shifted subtly. "I see. Well, let me show you to a room. You must be exhausted from your journey." The room was simple, a narrow bed, washstand, and small window overlooking the main street. When Hannah left, Sarah removed her veil with trembling fingers, catching her reflection in the small mirror. The familiar landscape of scars greeted her, pitted marks scattered across her once smooth complexion, most concentrated around her forehead and cheeks. She touched them gently, these badges of survival that had become her prison. The next morning, Sarah dressed carefully, selecting a high-neck dress of navy blue, practical yet respectable. Her veil secured, she made her way to Jenkins Mercantile, where William Jenkins had agreed to meet her. The store was the settlement's largest building, stocked with everything from farm implements to bolts of cloth, the unmistakable center of Pine Valley's commerce. William Jenkins stood behind the counter, tall, well-dressed, with a thick mustache and calculating eyes. He looked up as the bell above the door announced her arrival. "Mr. Jenkins," Sarah said, approaching the counter. "I'm Sarah Mitchell. We corresponded about the teaching position." His smile was professional, if cool. "Miss Mitchell, you've journeyed far. The position has generated considerable interest." "I included my qualifications and references in my letter," Sarah replied. "I taught for 3 years at Blackwell Academy for young ladies in Boston." "Yes, very impressive." Jenkins gestured to a small office at the back of the store. Let's discuss the particulars. The office was warm, sunlight streaming through windows that overlooked the settlement's main street. Jenkins seated himself behind a desk cluttered with ledgers and correspondence. Our previous teacher, Mrs. Abernathy, returned east after her husband's passing, he explained. Our children have been without formal education for nearly 6 months. We're quite eager to reopen the schoolhouse. Sarah nodded. I'm prepared to begin immediately. Before we proceed, I'm curious about your... Jenkins gestured vaguely toward her veil. Your correspondence didn't mention any particular religious obligations. Sarah's throat tightened. The moment she dreaded had arrived. It's not religious, Mr. Jenkins. Her voice remained steady despite her racing heart. I survived smallpox. 3 years ago, my face bears the scars. I wear the veil to spare others discomfort. Jenkins' expression hardened. Smallpox? The word emerged as though it were poison. I'm fully recovered. There's no risk of contagion. Perhaps, Jenkins said, rising abruptly, but you understand this is a small community. Parents entrust their children to our care. Appearances matter. My qualifications are impressive, he interrupted, but insufficient given the circumstances. His gaze had changed completely, fear and revulsion poorly disguised as professional concern. The position requires someone who won't disturb the children. Sarah stood, dignity her only remaining shield. You're refusing me the position because of my scars. I'm protecting our community, Jenkins replied coldly. This settlement has already endured considerable hardship. Disease is something we particularly fear in isolated places such as this. I am not a disease, Sarah said quietly but firmly. I am a survivor. Nevertheless, Jenkins continued, moving toward the door, I believe it would be best if you returned east on tomorrow's stage. Pine Valley isn't suitable for someone with your condition. The rejection stung like a physical blow. Sarah walked stiffly from the store, aware of curious glances tracking her progress. Outside, the afternoon sun felt suddenly harsh and unwelcoming. Her carefully constructed hopes crumbled. Around her, one interview, one glimpse of her past, and the door had slammed shut. What happened next became a blur of humiliation. Jenkins, clearly concerned about a smallpox survivor in their midst, wasted no time spreading word of her condition. By the time Sarah reached the inn, Hannah Cooper was waiting, her earlier friendliness replaced with thinly veiled fear. I'm sorry, Miss Mitchell, Hannah said, not quite meeting her eyes. We can't accommodate you further. There are concerns. I'm not contagious, Sarah insisted. The disease ran its course years ago. Perhaps, but we can't take chances, not with something so dangerous. Hannah held out a small purse. Your room payment returned. Please collect your belongings. The small gathering of onlookers in the inn's common room made no effort to hide their stares. Someone whispered, poxmarked, the words carrying clearly in the tense silence. A mother pulled her child closer, as though Sarah's mere presence might contaminate the air they breathed. With her trunk hastily repacked, Sarah found herself once again on Pine Valley's main street, the afternoon sun beating down mercilessly. The stagecoach wouldn't return until the following day. She had nowhere to go, no shelter, and no allies in this hostile place. As whispers and stares followed her progress down the street, Sarah fought back desperate tears. She had traveled so far, spent nearly everything she had on this journey, only to face the same fear and rejection that had driven her from Boston. Her grip on her trunk handle tightened until her knuckles turned white beneath her gloves. Quite a spectacle they're making, came a low, gruff voice beside her. Sarah turned, startled. A man stood nearby, tall and weathered, with dark hair streaked with gray and eyes the color of the mountains in the distance. His clothes marked him as someone who spent more time in wilderness than town. Buckskins and homespun, practical and worn. Unlike the others, he didn't stare at her with horror or disgust, but with something resembling irritation, directed not at her, but at the gathering crowd. "Thomas Walker," he said simply. "I trade furs and herbs with the settlements. You appear to be in need of assistance." Sarah hesitated, wary of further humiliation. "They won't let me stay," she said finally, "because of my..." She gestured vaguely toward her veiled face. Thomas eyed the gathering crowd with obvious disapproval. "Pine Valley prides itself on Christian charity," he said dryly, "until it's actually required." He glanced at her trunk. "I have a cabin about 3 miles north. It's not much, but you're welcome to shelter there until you decide your next move." "Why would you help me?" Sarah asked, suspicion born of harsh experience making her cautious. A shadow crossed his face. "Let's just say I understand what it means to be unwelcome based on things beyond your control." He reached for her trunk. "The offer stands. It'll be dark soon, and these mountains get cold at night. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." It was hardly proper. A single woman accepting shelter from a stranger, a man who clearly lived apart from society's norms, but propriety had already abandoned her, along with mercy and compassion. With nowhere else to turn, Sarah nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Walker." They left Pine Valley amid whispers and stares, following a narrow trail that wound through towering pines. Thomas walked ahead, carrying her trunk effortlessly, his strides long and sure. Sarah followed, exhaustion and despair making each step heavier than the last. "They're afraid," Thomas said after they'd walked in silence for some time. "Fear makes people cruel." "I survived," Sarah replied, her voice tight with emotion. "Shouldn't that inspire compassion rather than fear?" Thomas glanced back at her, his expression unreadable. "Should, perhaps, but rarely does." His cabin appeared as the sun began its descent behind the mountains, a sturdy structure of logs and stone nestled among the pines, with a small corral where a dappled mare grazed peacefully. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, suggesting someone had been there recently. "You don't live alone?" Sarah asked, suddenly nervous. "Just me," Thomas replied, setting down her trunk. "But Nijoni from Red Mesa checks on things when I'm away trading. She likely left the fire going when she saw the weather changing." The cabin's interior was surprisingly comfortable. A large stone fireplace, wooden furniture worn smooth with used shelves lined with books that seemed out of place in this frontier setting. Dried herbs hung from the rafters, filling the air with unfamiliar scents. Furs and hand-woven blankets added warmth to the rustic space. "It isn't much," Thomas said, sounding almost apologetic. "The sleeping loft is yours. I'll take the bench by the fire." Sarah stood awkwardly in the center of the cabin, overwhelmed by the day's events and this unexpected turn. "I can't impose..." "It's no imposition," he interrupted. "There's stew on the fire. You should eat." During the simple meal, Sarah found herself studying her reluctant host. Thomas Walker was not what she had expected in a frontier fur trader. He spoke precisely, almost formally, suggesting education beyond what his current situation would indicate. He asked no questions about her scars, made no reference to her appearance at all. His respect for her privacy was both unusual and deeply appreciated. "How long have you lived here?" she asked, breaking a lengthy silence. "Nearly 10 years, he replied. "Came west after the war. Found I preferred the company of trees and mountains to most people, and the local tribes. They accept your presence." A faint smile crossed his features. "More or less. I trade fairly, learn their ways when they're willing to teach. The Navajo at Red Mesa tolerate me, Nijoni, she's their medicine woman, seems to find me amusing." Sarah hesitated, then slowly removed her veil. If he was surprised by the extent of her scarring, he showed no sign, his expression remaining neutral. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for not turning away." Thomas met her gaze directly. "My sister Elizabeth had similar scars. She didn't survive, but faced the same fear and ignorance during her illness. I saw what that did to her spirit before the disease took her body." His words hung in the air between them, a shared understanding of how cruelty could wound as deeply as any disease. Outside, night had fallen completely, the forest filling with unfamiliar sounds that seemed to encircle the small cabin. "Rest," Thomas said, rising from the table. "Tomorrow, we'll consider your options." In the simple loft, lying beneath warm furs, Sarah stared into the darkness. The day's humiliation still burned, but alongside it flickered something unfamiliar, a tiny spark of hope, kindled by an unexpected act of kindness from a stranger who had seen her scars and offered shelter instead of fear. Morning brought a clarity that had been absent in the emotional chaos of the previous day. Sarah woke to the scent of coffee and the soft murmur of voices. Peering down from the loft, she saw Thomas in conversation with a woman dressed in a curious blend of traditional Navajo clothing and elements of settler garb. Her long black hair was braided with colorful threads, and numerous silver and turquoise ornaments adorned her neck and wrists. The woman looked up, seeming to sense Sarah's presence. Her dark eyes were sharp and assessing, but not unkind. "Our guest awakens," she said, her English clear though colored by the rhythms of her native tongue. "Come down, woman who survived. Let Nijoni see you properly." Startled by the directness of the address, Sarah hesitated only briefly before descending the ladder. Without her veil, she felt naked, exposed, every scar visible in the morning light streaming through the cabin's windows. Nijoni approached without hesitation, studying Sarah's face with the clinical interest of one who understood illness and healing. "The spotted sickness," she said, nodding. "You walk with strong spirit to have defeated such an enemy." "Most don't see it that way," Sarah replied quietly. "Most see with foolish eyes," Nijoni stated matter-of-factly. She reached out, her fingers hovering near Sarah's scars without quite touching them. "These are warrior marks. In my people's way, they would show others your strength, not your weakness." The words settled over Sarah like a balm. Warrior marks, not disfigurement, not curse, not shame, but evidence of a battle fought and won. Thomas cleared his throat. "Nijoni came to bring herbs and news," he explained. "Word of your arrival has spread quickly." "Jenkins has declared you dangerous," Nijoni added, a note of disgust in her voice. "Says you bring death sickness to their children." Sarah's brief moment of comfort evaporated. "That's absurd. The disease isn't contagious, once recovered." "Truth matters little when fear speaks loudly," Nijoni replied with a shrug. "But I have come with purpose beyond news," her dark eyes fixed on Sarah intently. "I have medicine for the spirit wounds these scars have caused you. Not to remove them, they are part of your story now, but to help you carry them with pride instead of shame." "What kind of medicine?" Sarah asked cautiously. Nijoni smiled, revealing teeth stained slightly red from something she chewed. "The kind that heals what cannot be seen. Come to Red Mesa when you are ready. First, you must decide whether to flee or fight the small mines of Pine Valley." With that cryptic statement, Nijoni gathered her shawl around her shoulders and nodded to Thomas. "The tall one with angry eyes searches the northern trails. Be watchful." Before Sarah could ask what this meant, the medicine woman was gone, the cabin door closing softly behind her. "She means Jenkins," Thomas explained, pouring a cup of coffee and offering it to Sarah. "He's likely gathering men to ensure you leave the area entirely." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she accepted the cup. They would force me out, like some criminal. Fear makes people capable of terrible things, Thomas replied, his voice hardening. But you have choices still. The stage returns today. You could head to Santa Fe, perhaps find better reception there. The suggestion hung in the air between them. The practical choice, the safe choice, would be to leave, start again, somewhere new, somewhere distant from Pine Valley and its judgment. Yet something within Sarah rebelled at the thought of running, again. "And if I choose not to flee?" she asked quietly. Thomas studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Then you fight, not with weapons, but with truth, with dignity, with the simple refusal to be less than what you are." A faint smile touched his lips. "And you would not fight alone." The declaration surprised her. "You barely know me, Mr. Walker. Why would you stand with me against your neighbors?" "Because they're wrong," he said simply. "And because I've spent too many years watching people be destroyed by ignorance. My sister, the Navajo, when the army decided they were inconvenient. Sometimes standing aside is the greater sin." His words resonated with something deep within Sarah, a conviction that had been buried beneath years of shame and rejection. Perhaps it was time to stop hiding, to stop fleeing from those who feared what they didn't understand. "If I stay," she said slowly, "what would that mean?" Thomas considered this. Confrontation, certainly. Jenkins has influence here, but he's not universally beloved. Dr. Peterson, for one, might be an ally. He trained back east and understands disease better than most here. He paused. "And there's Nizoni's offer. The Navajo have their own healing ways, different from what you might know, but powerful in their fashion." Sarah gazed out the cabin's small window, where morning light filtered through pine branches. The peaceful scene contrasted sharply with the turmoil inside her. She had come to Pine Valley seeking a new beginning, a place to belong. Instead, she had found the same fear and rejection that had driven her from Boston. Yet here, unexpectedly, she had also found something she hadn't encountered before. Allies willing to stand beside her, to see beyond her scars to the person beneath. "I won't run," she said finally, her voice stronger than it had been since her arrival. "I've spent 3 years hiding behind veils and shadows. Perhaps it's time to step into the light, whatever it might reveal." Thomas nodded, respect evident in his expression. "Then we begin with truth, and we see where it leads us." As the morning sun climbed higher, they spoke of strategies and possibilities, of potential allies and certain enemies. For the first time since the disease had marked her, Sarah felt something like purpose stirring within her, not merely survival, but the chance to reclaim dignity that fear had stolen. Whether Pine Valley would accept her remained uncertain, but one thing was clear. She would no longer accept the shame others tried to place upon her. The whisper in her mind, so long silenced, grew louder with each passing moment. "I survived. And that is not a curse to bear, but a victory to claim." The midday sun filtered through the pines as Thomas and Sarah followed a narrow trail toward Red Mesa. The decision to visit Nizoni had come naturally after their morning's resolution. If Sarah was to stand her ground in Pine Valley, she would need every advantage, including whatever healing the Navajo medicine woman had offered. Thomas walked slightly ahead, his movements fluid and assured against the rugged terrain. Sarah followed, her city boots already showing signs of wear from the unforgiving wilderness path. The Navajo call themselves Diné, the people, Thomas explained as they walked. They've suffered greatly at the hands of settlers and the army. Many were forced on the long walk to distant reservations. Those at Red Mesa managed to remain by hiding in these mountains. Yet they trust you, Sarah observed, stepping carefully over a fallen log. Thomas's laugh was brief and without humor. Trust is a strong word. They tolerate me because I've proven useful. I trade fairly and speak against those who would drive them away. Nijoni accepts me because she claims her spirits told her I have an honest heart. The others follow her judgment, albeit cautiously. The trail climbed steadily, winding through increasingly rocky terrain. Sarah's breath came in short gasps, unaccustomed to the altitude. Thomas slowed his pace without comment, allowing her to adjust. After nearly an hour of steady climbing, they crested a ridge, and red mesa spread before them. A small cluster of traditional hogans nestled against rust-colored cliffs, with gardens carefully tended in the sparse soil. Several children playing near the perimeter spotted them first. Unlike the children in Boston or Pine Valley, they didn't recoil from Sarah's scarred appearance. Instead, they approached with undisguised curiosity, speaking rapidly in their native tongue. One small girl reached out, pointing to Sarah's scars, then touched her own smooth cheek questioningly. "She asks if it hurts," Thomas translated. Sarah knelt to the child's level, surprising herself with the gesture. "Not anymore," she said gently. "Tell her they're just marks from a battle I fought and won." When Thomas translated, the girl nodded, solemnly, then reached out again, this time to trace one of the deeper scars with a gentle fingertip. There was no disgust in the gesture, only innocent wonder. Something tight within Sarah's chest loosened slightly. Nijoni emerged from the largest hogan, somehow aware of their arrival without being told. She wore her healer's garments, more elaborate than the day before, with intricate beadwork and symbols sewn into the fabric. Silver and turquoise adorned her wrists and neck, catching sunlight as she moved. "Woman who survived comes seeking strength," she stated, bypassing any formal greeting. "Good. The healing cannot begin until you seek it." Thomas nodded respectfully to Nijoni. "I'll return at sundown," he told Sarah. "There are trading matters I must attend to with the elders." Left alone with the medicine woman, Sarah felt suddenly vulnerable. In Boston, doctors had declared her scarring permanent, her condition beyond medical intervention. She had no reason to believe Navajo medicine could achieve what modern science could not. "You doubt," Nijoni said, reading her expression easily. "This is natural, but I do not seek to remove what marks you. I seek to change how you carry them." She led Sarah to a small hogan, set apart from the others. Inside, a fire burned in a central pit, filling the space with aromatic smoke from herbs Sarah couldn't identify. The room was arranged with woven mats and various objects: stones, feathers, clay pots containing powders and liquids. "Zit," Nijoni instructed, gesturing to a mat near the fire. "First, we must speak truth together. No healing comes without honesty." Sarah settled awkwardly onto the mat, unaccustomed to sitting on the ground. "What truth do you seek?" "Not what I seek, what you hide." Nijoni's dark eyes pierced through pretense. "Tell me of the sickness. Tell me how it changed your spirit, not just your skin." The request caught Sarah off guard. In Boston, no one had asked about her experience, only recoiled from its visible aftermath. Even Thomas, kind as he'd been, had respected her privacy, to the point of avoiding the subject. Now, Nijoni demanded the very story Sarah had buried beneath layers of shame and isolation. "I was teaching at a school for young ladies." Sarah began hesitantly. "The epidemic spread quickly through Boston. My boarding house was hit particularly hard. The other residents, all 8 of them, died within days of each other." Nijoni listened silently, her expression unchanged. "I was ill for weeks. The fever, the pain. I was delirious much of the time. When I finally recovered enough to rise from bed, I hardly recognized my reflection." Sarah's voice caught. "Everyone I knew treated me differently afterward. Parents withdrew their daughters from my classes. Friends stopped visiting. Even my own family suggested I live elsewhere, away from society." And inside, Nijoni pressed, what changed inside you? The question struck at something so deep, Sarah hadn't fully acknowledged it even to herself. Everything, she whispered. I became a ghost in my own life. Present but unseen. Or worse, seen only for my scars, never for myself. I began to believe I should have died alongside the others. Nijoni nodded, satisfied with this painful honesty. The spotted sickness took more than your smooth skin. It took your belonging. This is what we must heal. From a leather pouch, the medicine woman removed a small piece of polished obsidian, black and reflective. She held it before Sarah's face. Look, she commanded, see yourself truly. Sarah reluctantly gazed at her reflection in the dark. Stone. The pitted scars stood out starkly against her pale skin, mapping the course of the disease across her features. She had avoided mirrors for so long that the full impact of her appearance struck her anew. What do you see? Nijoni asked. Ugliness, Sarah admitted, the word barely audible. Ruin. Nijoni made a disapproving sound. You see with blind eyes. Look again. These marks follow the path the sickness took through your body. Yet you live. Each scar is a place where death touched you, and you refused it. She traced her finger along one prominent mark on Sarah's cheek. This is not ruin. This is victory written on flesh. The perspective was so foreign, so contrary to everything Sarah had been conditioned to believe, that she could barely comprehend. It, victory, not defeat, strength, not weakness. Among my people, Nijoni continued, warriors sometimes bear marks that tell their stories, scars from battles, tattoos that speak of visions and powers. Your skin now tells your truth. You faced death and returned. This is sacred. She set down the obsidian and reached for a small clay pot. From it, she removed a reddish paste that smelled of unfamiliar herbs. This medicine comes from sacred plants that grow only on the highest mesas. It will not remove your scars, but it will help your spirit recognize their true meaning. Nijoni's touch was gentle as she began applying the paste to Sarah's scarred skin. Close your eyes. Listen to the old stories while the medicine works. As the cool paste covered her scars, Sarah closed her eyes. Nijoni's voice shifted into a rhythmic chant, sometimes in English, often in Navajo. She spoke of ancient heroes who bore the marks of their trials proudly, of women who carried visible signs of the children they had birthed and the hardships they had endured. She told of transformation, how the struggle against death changed a person forever, making them a bridge between worlds. Time seemed to lose meaning in the smoke-filled hogan. The chanting, the gentle touch of Nijoni's fingers on her face, the unfamiliar scents, all combined to create a dreamlike state. Beneath the surface of consciousness, something shifted within Sarah. The shame that had become so fundamental to her identity began to loosen its grip, making space for a different understanding of her scars and what they signified. When Nijoni finally fell silent, Sarah opened her eyes. The paste on her face had dried, pulling slightly at her skin. Now we wash away the old thinking, the medicine woman said, dipping a cloth in warm water. But the medicine remains beneath the skin, working slowly. As the paste was gently removed, Sarah felt strangely lighter, as though some invisible burden had begun to lift. Whether from Nijoni's herbs or her words, something had changed. The healing is not complete, Nijoni cautioned, as if reading her thoughts. Medicine must be taken many times to cure deep sickness. You will return. What if Pine Valley won't allow me to stay? Sarah asked, giving voice to the fear that had shadowed her throughout the day. Nijoni's laugh was unexpected and rich. Pine Valley is young and foolish, like a child throwing stones at what it fears. You are stronger than their fear, woman who survived. Remember this when they try to make you small again. Outside, the sun had begun its descent toward the horizon. Thomas would return soon to escort her back to his cabin. Sarah rose stiffly from the mat, her legs protesting after hours of sitting on the ground. "Thank you," she said, the words inadequate for what had transpired. Nijoni inclined her head slightly. "You begin a difficult path, but you no longer walk it blind." She pressed a small leather pouch into Sarah's hand. "For the nights when old thoughts return, burn a pinch in your evening fire. Remember what I have shown you." Thomas was waiting at the edge of the settlement, deep in conversation with an elder whose lined face suggested decades of harsh sun and hard living. They parted with a gesture of respect before Thomas turned to Sarah, his expression questioning. It was. Sarah searched for words to describe the experience. Unexpected, powerful. I'm not entirely sure what happened. Nijoni's medicine works differently for each person, Thomas replied as they began their descent from Red Mesa. Some find physical healing, others spiritual guidance. What matters is whether it helped. Sarah considered this as they walked, the setting sun casting long shadows across the trail. "I think it did," she said finally. "She helped me see my scars differently, not as something shameful, but as marks of survival, of strength." Thomas nodded, something like approval warming his usually guarded expression. That's what Elizabeth never had the chance to learn. By the time I understood it myself, she was already gone. The mention of his sister opened a door to shared understanding. As they navigated the darkening trail, Thomas spoke more openly than he had previously, telling Sarah about Elizabeth, her gentle spirit, her gift for music, her dream of teaching like Sarah. How the smallpox had taken not just her life, but her hope long before her heart stopped beating. "The cruelty hurt her more than the disease," he said, helping Sarah across a narrow stream. She couldn't bear how people looked at her as though she'd become something monstrous rather than merely ill. It broke something essential inside her. "Is that why you came west?" Sarah asked, after she died. Thomas was silent for several steps. "Partly. The war had already shown me humanity's capacity for brutality. Elizabeth's suffering confirmed it. I needed space from the so-called civilization that could turn so quickly on its own." The last light was fading as they approached the cabin. Thomas lit lamps and stoked the fire while Sarah settled at the table, exhaustion from the day's physical and emotional journey washing over her. "We should discuss what comes next," Thomas said, setting a simple meal before her. "Jenkins won't simply accept your decision to stay. He'll view it as a challenge to his authority." Sarah picked at the food, her appetite diminished by apprehension. "What options do we have?" "Dr. Peterson might be our best hope for an ally. He studied medicine in Philadelphia before coming west. He understands disease better than most here and has occasionally stood against Jenkins on matters of public health." "And if he refuses to help?" Thomas's expression hardened. "Then we face Jenkins directly. You've survived worse than a small-minded merchant, Sarah Mitchell." The use of her given name, so casual yet intimate, caught Sarah's attention. It was the first time he had addressed her so directly, and it created a strange fluttering sensation in her chest. "You don't need to risk your position here," she said softly. "These people are your neighbors, even if you keep your distance." "My position?" Thomas gave a short laugh. "I'm already the strange hermit who trades with Indians and refuses to attend church services. My position isn't particularly elevated. Still, helping me could cost you what little acceptance you have." Thomas studied her across the table, firelight casting his features in warm relief. "Some prices are worth paying for what's right. Get some rest. Tomorrow we visit Dr. Peterson." Sleep came fitfully to Sarah that night. In her dreams, she stood before a crowd in Pine Valley, her scars exposed. But instead of horror and disgust, the faces showed only curiosity and eventual acceptance. She woke just before dawn, the dream lingering like a promise, or perhaps a prophecy. The morning brought heavy clouds and a chill that hinted at rain. Thomas prepared the wagon in silence, his movements efficient and purposeful. Sarah dressed carefully, foregoing her veil for the first time since arriving in Pine Valley. The decision left her feeling simultaneously vulnerable and strangely powerful. "You're sure?" Thomas asked when she emerged from the cabin, her face uncovered. Sarah touched one prominent scar along her jawline. "Najoni called these warrior marks. Perhaps it's time I carried them accordingly." Thomas nodded, his expression reflecting respect mingled with concern. "It won't be easy." "Few worthwhile things are," she replied, climbing onto the wagon. Seat beside him. The journey to town was tense with anticipation. Sarah's heart pounded as familiar buildings came into view: the mercantile, the inn, the small church with its modest steeple. People stopped to stare as Thomas guided the wagon down the main street, whispers following in their wake. Sarah kept her gaze forward, fighting the instinct to hide her face. Dr. Peterson's clinic occupied a small building near the edge of the settlement. A hand-painted sign announced his services in faded letters. Thomas helped Sarah down from the wagon, his hand lingering supportively at her elbow. "James Peterson is a good man," he said quietly. "Sometimes good men need reminding of their principles, but the foundation is solid." The clinic's interior was unexpectedly bright and clean, with shelves of carefully labeled medicines and an examining table covered in fresh linen. Dr. Peterson himself, a slender man with spectacles and prematurely graying hair, looked up from his desk with mild surprise. "Thomas Walker," he said, rising. "It's been months since you've graced us with your presence." His gaze shifted to Sarah, widening slightly as he registered her scarred features, but without the revulsion she had come to expect. "And you must be Miss Mitchell. I've heard considerable discussion about your arrival." "No doubt much of it. Unflattering," Sarah replied directly. Dr. Peterson gestured toward chairs. "Please, sit. And yes, William Jenkins has been particularly vocal about potential health risks to the community." He studied her face with professional interest. "Smallpox, I presume. Fully recovered some time ago, judging by the healing." 3 years, Sarah confirmed. "There's absolutely no risk of contagion." "Of course not," Peterson agreed immediately. "Any educated person understands that survivors pose no threat once the disease has run its course." He removed his spectacles, polishing them thoughtfully. "May I ask why you've come to me? If it's medical attention you seek..." "We need an ally," Thomas interrupted bluntly. "Someone with standing in Pine Valley who can speak the medical truth about Sarah's condition. Jenkins is using fear to turn the town against her." Peterson replaced his spectacles carefully. "I see. And you believe my medical opinion would sway public sentiment?" "It might," Thomas replied, "at least among those whose minds aren't already poisoned by prejudice." The doctor's gaze returned to Sarah's scars, his expression contemplative. "The timing is interesting. Just yesterday, William asked me to verify his claim that you present a health risk. He's calling a town meeting for tomorrow evening to discuss, and I quote, 'the smallpox threat in our midst.'" Sarah's stomach tightened. "And what did you tell him?" "That I would need to examine the patient before offering any medical opinion." A faint smile touched Peterson's lips. "And now, conveniently, the patient has arrived." Hope flickered within Sarah. "Then you'll help us?" Peterson leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Miss Mitchell, I came west after losing my wife and daughter to cholera in Philadelphia. I watched how fear and ignorance spread faster than the disease itself. how neighbors turned against neighbors, how the ill were abandoned in their hour of greatest need. His voice softened. I recognize the scars you bear, both visible and hidden. I will speak the medical truth at tomorrow's meeting, whatever the personal cost. Relief washed over Sarah like a wave. They had found an ally, perhaps the most valuable one possible in their current circumstances. Dr. Peterson's medical authority might be the only voice Pine Valley would respect over Jenkins's fearful accusations. "Thank you," she said, the words thick with emotion. "Don't thank me yet," Peterson cautioned. "Jenkins holds considerable sway here. He controls credit at the mercantile. Many families depend on his goodwill to survive until harvest or the next cattle sale. Standing against him has consequences." "We understand the risk you're taking," Thomas said. "It won't be forgotten." As they prepared to leave, Peterson motioned Sarah aside. "A moment, if you would." From a small cabinet, he removed a jar of pale ointment. "This won't remove your scars, but it may help with any lingering discomfort or tightness. European medicine has its limits with such things, but we try our best." The simple kindness, treating her condition as a medical matter rather than a moral failing, touched Sarah deeply. "Navajo medicine has its advantages as well," she said, thinking of Nijoni's ceremony. "Different methods, similar intentions." Peterson's eyebrows rose with interest. "You've consulted with the medicine woman at Red Mesa. Fascinating. I've long believed we Western doctors could learn much from native healing practices, if only pride and prejudice didn't interfere." The connection formed between them in that moment, a shared respect for different paths to healing, felt significant somehow. Sarah left the clinic with the strange sense that forces beyond her understanding were aligning, bringing together allies she never expected to find in this remote corner of the territory. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance as they returned to the wagon. Thomas glanced at the darkening sky. "Storm's coming," he observed. "We should hurry if we want to reach the cabin before it breaks." They had barely left the outskirts of Pine Valley when horsemen appeared on the road ahead. 4 riders, led by William Jenkins himself, their expressions grim beneath the brims of their hats. Thomas slowed the wagon, his posture tensing. "Keep moving," he said quietly to Sarah. "Whatever happens, don't let them intimidate you." Jenkins raised his hand, signaling them to stop. His gaze fixed on Sarah's unveiled face, disgust evident in his expression. "So it's true," he called loudly. "You've returned despite my clear warning." "I never left," Sarah replied evenly, "and I have no intention of doing so based on unfounded fears." Jenkins' face darkened. "This isn't Boston, Miss Mitchell. Out here, we protect our community from threats by whatever means necessary." Thomas's hand moved subtly toward the rifle secured beneath the wagon seat. "Are you threatening a woman under my protection, Jenkins?" His voice was dangerously calm. "Protection?" Jenkins scoffed. "You're harboring a walking pestilence. Dr. Peterson may have been fooled by your pretty words, but I know disease when I see it." "You know nothing of medicine or science," Sarah said, surprising herself with her boldness. "I survived smallpox. I'm no more contagious than someone who has recovered from a common cold." "Save your lies for the town meeting," Jenkins retorted. "Tomorrow night, Pine Valley will decide whether you stay or go. Until then..." His gaze hardened. "Keep your distance from decent folk." With that, he wheeled his horse around, the other riders following suit. They galloped back toward town, leaving dust and tension in their wake. "That went better than expected," Thomas remarked dryly. "Better?" Sarah asked incredulously. "He all but threatened violence, yet he's waiting for the town meeting. That suggests he's not entirely confident in his position." Thomas flicked the reins, urging the horses forward. Jenkins typically acts first and justifies later when he feels secure in his authority. Or perhaps he simply wants a larger audience for my humiliation, Sarah said bitterly. Perhaps. Thomas glanced at her, admiration evident in his expression. But you faced him without flinching, without hiding. That courage won't go unnoticed by everyone. The storm broke as they reached the cabin, rain falling in heavy sheets that transformed the dirt yard to mud within minutes. Inside, as Thomas built up the fire against the sudden chill, Sarah sat at the table, emotion finally overwhelming her carefully maintained composure. "What if it isn't enough?" she asked, her voice breaking. "What if Dr. Peterson's support doesn't matter? What if they refuse to see beyond these scars?" Thomas knelt before her, his weathered hands gently covering hers. "Then we try something else, and something after that. We don't surrender to ignorance, Sarah. Not ever." The intensity in his eyes, the unwavering conviction in his voice, awakened something long dormant within her, a fierce determination that had been buried beneath years of rejection and shame. Thomas Walker had lost his sister to the same disease that had marked but spared Sarah. In standing with her now, he fought not just for her dignity, but for Elizabeth's memory as well. "Tomorrow," she said, steadying her voice with effort, "I'll face them. No veil, no shame. Let them see what survival looks like." Outside, lightning split the sky, thunder following like nature's applause for her resolve. The storm would pass by morning, leaving the world washed clean. Perhaps, Sarah thought, the storm brewing in Pine Valley might similarly clear away old fears and prejudices, revealing clearer skies ahead. Morning arrived with unexpected clarity, the storm having swept away both clouds and dust. Sunlight streamed through the cabin windows, illuminating motes of dust that danced in golden beams. Sarah woke with a sense of purpose that had been absent for years. Today would determine whether Pine Valley became her home or another place that had rejected her. The difference, she realized as she dressed, was that this time she would not slink away in shame. Whatever happened at the town meeting, she would face it with the dignity Najoni had reminded her was her birthright. Thomas was already awake, his expression somber as he prepared a simple breakfast. The quietness between them held a different quality than before, not awkward, but heavy with shared purpose and unspoken concern. "I've been thinking," he said finally, setting a plate before her. "Jenkins won't fight fair tonight. He'll appeal to emotion, not reason. Dr. Peterson's medical facts may not be enough." Sarah nodded slowly. "What would you suggest?" "Stories change hearts more effectively than facts," Thomas replied. "People fear what they don't understand, what feels alien. If you can make them see you, truly see you beyond the scars, some might find the courage to stand against Jenkins." "You want me to tell my story in front of the entire settlement?" The idea made Sarah's stomach tighten with apprehension. "Only if you feel strong enough." Thomas's gaze was steady, respectful of her agency. "Your journey through the disease, your survival, it humanizes what they currently fear as an abstract threat." Sarah considered his words as she ate. The thought of laying bare her most painful memories before strangers was terrifying. Yet perhaps Thomas was right. Facts alone rarely swayed deeply held fears. Stories, however, had power to bridge the gap between difference and understanding. "I'll try," she said finally, "though I'm not sure I have the words." "You do," Thomas assured her. "I've heard them when you speak of your past, the strength beneath the pain, the hope that keeps driving you forward despite everything." His faith in her was both bewildering and fortifying. This gruff, solitary man who had initially seemed so detached from human concerns had revealed himself to be remarkably perceptive about matters of the heart. Sarah found herself studying his weathered features in the morning light, noting how his eyes softened when they met hers, how the permanent furrow between his brows eased in moments of quiet companionship. "There's something else we should discuss," Thomas said, his tone shifting to something more hesitant. "After tonight, regardless of the outcome, your staying here could damage your reputation beyond repair." "My reputation?" Sarah gave a mirthless laugh. "I think that concern is rather belated, given my current circumstances." "Nevertheless." Thomas looked uncomfortable, clearly navigating unfamiliar territory. A single woman residing with an unmarried man, however innocent the arrangement, invites speculation. If you're to have any chance at building a life here, certain proprieties must be observed. Understanding dawned slowly. "Are you suggesting I should seek lodging elsewhere if the town accepts my presence?" "I'm suggesting," Thomas said, carefully, "that if you wish to stay in Pine Valley permanently, we should consider a more formal arrangement." The implication hung in the air between them, neither clearly stated nor easily dismissed. Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks, uncertain whether from indignation or something altogether different. "Mr. Walker, if you're proposing marriage as a solution to gossip, I must—" "No," he interrupted firmly. "Not as a solution to gossip, as a recognition of what has begun between us, at least on my part." His gaze, direct and unflinching, met hers. "I'm not a man given to romantic declarations, Sarah. My life has left little room for such things. But these days with you have awakened something I thought long dead. If you feel nothing similar, say so plainly, and we'll speak no more of it." The confession, so unlike his usual reserve, left Sarah momentarily speechless. She had been so focused on the struggle with Jenkins and Pine Valley that she had scarcely acknowledged the growing connection between herself and Thomas. Now, faced with his honesty, she was forced to examine her own heart. "I don't know what. I feel," she admitted finally, "everything has happened so quickly. I came here seeking a teaching position and found myself fighting for basic dignity instead. There hasn't been time to consider other matters." Thomas nodded, accepting her uncertainty without visible disappointment. "Then we set it aside, until after tonight's meeting, one battle at a time." His practicality was oddly comforting. Unlike the few suitors she'd had before her illness, Thomas made no demands, placed no expectations on her emotional response. He had simply spoken his truth and allowed her space for her own. The remainder of the day passed in quiet preparation. Thomas repaired his wagon and tended to tasks around the cabin, while Sarah rehearsed what she might say at the meeting. By late afternoon, a sense of nervous anticipation had settled over them both. As they prepared to depart for town, Thomas handed Sarah a small object, a polished turquoise stone on a simple leather cord. "From Nijoni," he explained. "She brought it this morning while you were still asleep. Said it would remind you to speak your truth from strength, not fear." Sarah slipped the cord over her head, the smooth stone cool against her skin beneath her high collar. The simple gift felt like a talisman, connecting her to the medicine woman's wisdom and strange power. The journey to Pine Valley was silent, each occupied with their own thoughts as the wagon rattled along the now muddy trail. The settlement came into view just as the sun began its descent behind the western mountains, casting long shadows across the main street. Even from a distance, it was clear that tonight was no ordinary evening in Pine Valley. Lanterns glowed from every building, and people moved purposefully toward the church, which served as the town's meeting hall for secular gatherings. Thomas helped Sarah down from the wagon, his hand lingering supportively at her elbow. "Remember," he said quietly, "you're not alone." Her unveiled face drew immediate attention as they approached the church. Conversations halted, heads turned, and expressions ranged from outright hostility to uncomfortable curiosity. Sarah kept her chin level, Nijoni's turquoise a reassuring weight against her chest. She was a survivor, not just of smallpox, but of the cruelty and rejection that had followed. Whatever judgment Pine Valley passed tonight, she would endure. The church interior was crowded, nearly every adult resident in attendance. Lanterns hung from ceiling beams, casting flickering light over wooden pews filled beyond capacity. At the front, near the pulpit, stood William Jenkins, flanked by several of his strongest supporters. His expression darkened visibly when he spotted Sarah and Thomas entering. "I see the afflicted woman has chosen to display her condition openly," he announced loudly, silencing the murmurs that had arisen at their entrance. "Perhaps now everyone can see clearly the danger she represents." "The only danger here is ignorance," came a firm voice from the side aisle. Dr. Peterson moved forward, medical bag in hand, his normally gentle demeanor hardened with resolve. "And I intend to address that directly." Pastor Thompson, a soft-spoken man with a perpetually worried expression, stepped to the pulpit. "Please, let's conduct ourselves with Christian charity. This meeting was called to discuss concerns about Miss Mitchell's condition in a reasoned manner." Christian charity. Thomas's voice carried clearly across the crowd. "Is that what you call spreading fear and falsehoods about a woman whose only crime was surviving a terrible illness?" Murmurs rippled through the gathering, some hostile, others uncertain. Sarah felt dozens of eyes upon her scarred face, the familiar weight of judgment pressing down like a physical force. For a moment her courage wavered. Then she felt the smooth turquoise against her skin and remembered Nijoni's words, "These are warrior marks. You faced death and returned. This is sacred." Jenkins seized the momentary silence. "We've invited Dr. Peterson to share his medical opinion on whether this woman poses a threat to our community. After that, we'll vote on whether she can remain in Pine Valley." "Vote!" Thomas's voice rose sharply. "You have no authority to banish anyone from this territory." "We have the authority to protect our families," Jenkins retorted. "If Miss Mitchell is deemed a threat, she'll find no work, no lodging, no welcome here. That's our right." Pastor Thompson raised his hands placatingly. "Please, let's hear the doctor's assessment before tensions rise further." Dr. Peterson moved to the front, his manner shifting to professional authority as he addressed the crowd. "Many of you know that I trained at Jefferson Medical College in Philadelphia before coming west. I've treated numerous infectious diseases, including smallpox." He gestured towards Sarah. "Miss Mitchell suffered from smallpox approximately 3 years ago. The disease has completely run its course. The scars you see are merely marks left behind, like scars from any other injury." He paused, looking directly at several mothers holding young children. "She is no more contagious than someone who has recovered from measles or influenza. Medical science is absolutely clear on this point. Survivors pose no risk whatsoever to the community. Then why does the army quarantine Indian villages when smallpox appears?" Challenged a voice from the back. "Why do we hear stories of entire settlements wiped out?" "Because active cases are indeed highly contagious," Peterson explained patiently. "But Miss Mitchell is not an active case. She is a survivor, immune to future infection. In fact, during epidemics, survivors are often the only ones who can safely tend the ill without risk to themselves." Jenkins stepped forward, clearly frustrated by the doctor's clear explanation. "Pretty words, Doctor. But can you guarantee the safety of our children? Can you swear before God that her presence poses absolutely no risk?" "I can," Peterson replied without hesitation, "with the same certainty that I can swear the sun will rise tomorrow." A murmur of relief passed through some in the crowd, but Jenkins was not finished. Even if what you say is true, there's still the matter of public sentiment. Our children would be frightened by such a visible reminder of illness in their schoolroom. Parents have expressed concerns about the effect on young minds. Frightened. The word escaped Sarah before she could contain it. All eyes turned to her as she stepped forward, her heart pounding but her resolve firm. "May I speak, Pastor?" Pastor Thompson nodded, surprise evident in his expression. Few had expected the veiled woman to address the gathering directly. Sarah moved to the front, conscious of every eye upon her scarred face, yet drawing strength from the very visibility she had hidden for so long. She touched the turquoise at her throat, gathering her courage. "My name is Sarah Mitchell," she began, her voice stronger than she had anticipated. 3 years ago, I was teaching at a girls' school in Boston. When smallpox swept through the city, everyone in my boarding house fell ill. I alone survived. She paused, looking directly at the mothers Jenkins had appealed to moments before. "I understand fear. I've seen what this disease can do. I watched friends die in agony while I somehow lived. But what came after the illness, the rejection, the disgust, the way society treated me as something less than human, that caused a different kind of suffering?" Her gaze moved across the gathered faces, noting how some avoided eye contact while others stared with undisguised curiosity or pity. "Mr. Jenkins suggests children would be frightened by my appearance. Perhaps they would at first. But children learn fear from adults. They learn compassion the same way." Sarah gestured toward her scarred face. "These marks tell a story of survival against terrible odds. Is that really what you want to shield your children from? The knowledge that human beings can endure tremendous suffering and emerge stronger. That different doesn't mean dangerous?" A strange silence had fallen over the church. Even Jenkins seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Sarah continued, her confidence growing with each word. "I came to Pine Valley seeking a fresh start, a chance to use my education and experience to teach your children. Not just reading and arithmetic, but perhaps something about courage and acceptance as well." She turned slightly, meeting Thomas's supportive gaze. "I've found unexpected kindness here, alongside the fear. I've seen that this community has the capacity for both cruelty and compassion. Tonight, you choose which path to follow." From the middle of the gathering, a woman stood, Hannah Cooper from the inn, whose initial rejection had been Sarah's first taste of Pine Valley's fear. "Miss Mitchell," she said hesitantly, "I owe you an apology. When you first arrived, I acted from ignorance and fear rather than Christian charity. If Dr. Peterson says you pose no danger, then the inn would welcome your custom should you need lodging." The simple gesture of acceptance created a ripple effect. Benjamin Harris, the general store owner, rose next. "The school has stood empty too long. Our children need education, and qualified teachers are scarce in the territory. If Miss Mitchell is willing to teach, despite our initial discourtesy, I would support her appointment." Jenkins's face darkened with each statement of support. "This is sentiment overriding sense," he protested sharply. "One tearful speech doesn't erase the danger." "There is no danger, William," Dr. Peterson interrupted firmly. "Only your stubborn refusal to accept medical facts over personal prejudice." "I have kept this settlement safe for years," Jenkins encountered, his voice rising. "Made hard decisions when others wavered. If disease enters Pine Valley under my watch, it would have nothing to do with Miss Mitchell." Peterson finished for him. "You're using fear to maintain control. Nothing more." The accusation hung in the air, bold and undeniable. Several people shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances that suggested the doctor's words had struck a recognizable truth. Jenkins had indeed ruled Pine Valley through a combination of economic leverage and cultivated fear, positioning himself as the settlement's protector against various threats, real and imagined. "We should vote," Pastor Thompson suggested, attempting to diffuse the growing tension. "That was the purpose of this gathering, after all." "Before we do," Thomas spoke up, moving to stand beside Sarah, "there's something else to consider. Red. Mesa has offered Miss Mitchell their welcome and protection should Pine Valley reject her. Chief Many Horses values education for the children of his people." The statement, while true, was also strategic. Sarah realized with admiration. Thomas was reminding Pine Valley that their children's education hung in the balance, while simultaneously letting them know Sarah had alternatives. She wasn't pleading for acceptance out of desperation. Jenkins seized upon this new angle. "There! You see, she's already aligned herself with the Indians. Next, she'll be carrying our town's business to them, telling them our weaknesses." "The only weakness I see," came a new voice, "is a man so frightened of a school teacher that he would rather deprive our children of education than admit he was wrong." All heads turned toward Sheriff Robert Caldwell, who had remained silent until now. The sheriff was not an imposing man physically, but his quiet authority carried weight in the community. "I've listened to Dr. Peterson's medical opinion and Miss Mitchell's account of her experience," Caldwell continued. "I've observed Mr. Walker's willingness to stand by her, despite potential cost to himself. And I've heard Mr. Jenkins appeal repeatedly to fear rather than fact." He looked around the church deliberately. "As sheriff, my concern is justice and public safety. I see no threat to either in Miss Mitchell's presence. In fact, I see a greater danger in allowing unfounded fears to drive our decisions." Jenkins's face flushed with anger. "Since when does the sheriff determine town policy? This is a matter for property owners and family heads to decide." "Then let them decide," Caldwell replied evenly, "with all the facts before them, not just your accusations." Pastor Thompson cleared his throat nervously. "Let's proceed with the vote then. Those in favor of allowing Miss Mitchell to remain in Pine Valley and potentially assume teaching duties, please stand." The moment stretched, painfully as Sarah held her breath. Dr. Peterson was first on his feet, followed immediately by Thomas and Sheriff Caldwell. Then, gradually, others began to rise. Hannah Cooper and her husband Benjamin Harris, several farmers and their wives. Not everyone stood. Perhaps a third of the gathering remained seated, including Jenkins and his closest allies, but a clear majority had risen in support. "It seems the community has spoken," Pastor Thompson announced, relief evident in his voice. "Miss Mitchell is welcome in Pine Valley." The tension that had gripped Sarah throughout the meeting released suddenly, leaving her lightheaded with relief. They had won, not unanimously, but decisively enough to secure her place in the settlement. Thomas's hand found hers, squeezing gently in shared victory. Jenkins, however, was not prepared to concede so easily. "This isn't finished," he declared, his voice tight with controlled rage. "When children fall ill, when disease spreads, remember who invited it into our midst." He gestured sharply to his supporters, and they followed him as he stormed from the church. In his wake, an awkward uncertainty rippled through those who remained. Victory had been achieved, but at the cost of deepening divisions within the small community. Several people approached Sarah hesitantly, offering tentative welcomes or apologizing for their initial reactions. Others slipped away quietly, unwilling to openly oppose Jenkins, but equally unwilling to support him after the vote. "It went better than I expected," Dr. Peterson said quietly as he joined Sarah and Thomas. "Though Jenkins won't surrender easily. He's not accustomed to losing public confrontations." "What happens now?" Sarah asked, still processing the sudden shift in her circumstances. "Now," said Hannah Cooper, approaching with determined steps, "you come to the inn. I've a proper room prepared, my way of making amends for my earlier behavior. And tomorrow, added Benjamin Harris. "We can discuss reopening the schoolhouse. It needs some attention after standing empty these months, but nothing that can't be managed before classes begin." The simple, practical offers of accommodation and employment, the very things Sarah had sought upon her arrival, felt almost surreal after everything that had transpired. She glanced at Thomas, suddenly uncertain about leaving the safety of his cabin, the quiet sanctuary where she had found the first true acceptance since her illness. He seemed to read her thoughts. "It's the right next step," he said softly. "Establishing yourself properly in the community." There was something in his tone, a sense of loss carefully concealed beneath practical considerations, that reminded Sarah of their unfinished conversation from that morning. In the rush of the town meeting and its outcome, the matter of what existed between them had been set aside. Now, with her place in Pine Valley provisionally secured, those unresolved feelings resurfaced. "Perhaps you could call at the inn tomorrow," she suggested, "to discuss arrangements for retrieving the remainder of my belongings." Thomas understood her meaning immediately. "Of course, there's no rush. Your things will be safe until you're ready." As the church gradually emptied, Sarah found herself walking between Hannah Cooper and Thomas, an odd procession that symbolized her transition from outcast to provisional community member. The night air felt cool against her skin, stars brilliant in the clear sky above Pine Valley. For the first time since her arrival, she walked openly, face unveiled, meeting the gazes of those they passed without shame or apology. At the inn's entrance, Thomas hesitated. "I'll come by tomorrow as we discussed," he said formally, conscious of Hannah's presence. "Good night, Miss Mitchell." "Good night, Mr. Walker," she replied with equal formality. "And thank you for everything." As he turned away, Sarah felt a curious emptiness, as though something essential were departing with him. The realization was startling in its clarity. In the few days they had spent together, Thomas Walker had become more than an ally or protector. He had become someone whose presence she valued beyond practical considerations, whose absence left a tangible void. Hannah showed her to a comfortable room, ironically, the same one Sarah had briefly occupied upon her arrival before being evicted. Now, however, Hannah was almost painfully solicitous, assuring Sarah of privacy, security, and respect from the inn's staff and other guests. "It was wrong, how we treated you," Hannah said as she prepared to leave. "Fear makes fools of decent people sometimes." "Yes," Sarah agreed softly, "though courage can restore what fear damages." Alone at last, Sarah moved to the small mirror, hanging on the wall. The face that looked back at her was fundamentally unchanged from days earlier. The same scars mapped her features, evidence of her battle with death. Yet something in her eyes was different. The shame that had haunted her gaze for 3 years had diminished, replaced by a steady resolve born of confrontation and victory. She touched one prominent scar along her jawline, remembering Nijoni's words. "These are warrior marks. You faced death and returned. This is sacred." For the first time since the disease had ravaged her body and her life, Sarah began to believe it might be true. Dawn emerged over Pine Valley, painting the mountaintops with amber light. Sarah woke early, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings of her room at the inn. The events of the previous night came rushing back. The town meeting, the vote in her favor, Jenkins's barely veiled threats as he stormed out. A mixture of triumph and apprehension stirred within her. She had won the right to stay, but at what cost? The merchant's influence reached into every corner of the settlement's life. His opposition could still make her position precarious. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Hannah Cooper stood outside with a breakfast tray, her manner considerably warmer than during Sarah's first brief stay. "Thought you might prefer to eat in private this morning," Hannah explained, setting the tray on a small table near the window. Some folks are eager to meet the new school teacher, but I figured you might need a moment's peace first. Thank, you, Sarah said, genuinely appreciative of the consideration. It's been overwhelming. Hannah lingered, clearly wanting to say more. My William, my husband, he says Jenkins was at the saloon until late, drinking and making threats. Nothing specific, mind you, but dark talk all the same. You'd do well to be cautious. The warning didn't surprise Sarah, yet hearing it confirmed made her stomach tighten with anxiety. Does he have enough influence to overturn last night's decision? Not directly, Hannah replied thoughtfully. But a man like William Jenkins has ways of making life difficult for those who cross him. Credit at the mercantile suddenly restricted, orders from back east mysteriously delayed, whispers that damage reputation. She sighed. Small places like Pine Valley run on connections and goodwill. Jenkins controls more of both than anyone. After Hannah departed, Sarah ate sparingly, her appetite diminished by concern. She dressed carefully in her best remaining dress, navy blue with a modest lace collar, and arranged her hair neatly. If she was to face Pine Valley as its prospective teacher today, she would do so with every advantage proper appearance could provide. A different kind of knock sounded an hour later, firmer, more decisive. Sarah opened the door to find Thomas, hat in hand, looking somewhat ill at ease within the inn's confines. You look rested, he observed, his eyes taking in her appearance with quiet appreciation. Appearances can be deceptive, she replied with a faint smile. Hannah's just warned me about Jenkins's continued opposition. Thomas nodded grimly. I've heard similar concerns. He spent the night consolidating his supporters, but we have allies too, more than before last night. Is it enough? He hesitated, honesty winning over reassurance. I don't know. Jenkins has built his influence here over many years. It won't crumble in a day, even after a public defeat. Sarah gestured for him to enter, conscious of the door standing open and the potential for gossip. Thomas stepped inside but remained near the entrance, maintaining a respectful distance that both honored propriety and acknowledged the undefined nature of their relationship. Benjamin Harris has invited me to see the schoolhouse this morning, Sarah said, changing the subject to more immediate concerns. Apparently it needs considerable work before classes can begin. I'd be happy to help with repairs, Thomas offered. I'm handy with tools, and it would go faster with additional labor. His simple offer touched Sarah deeply. This man who had lived as a near hermit for years continued to extend himself on her behalf, risking his carefully constructed isolation for her welfare. I'd appreciate that, she said softly. And there's the other matter we discussed yesterday morning. About arrangements. Thomas's expression grew more guarded, as though preparing himself for rejection. There's no rush to decide. You've only just secured your place here. That's just it, Sarah replied, finding unexpected clarity as she spoke. I have a place here now because of you. Your protection, your faith in me when no one else showed. I owe you. You owe me nothing, he interrupted firmly. Whatever I've done was freely given, not a debt to be repaid. I know, she assured him quickly. I'm expressing myself poorly. What I mean is... She drew a steadying breath. These past days have shown me possibilities I'd given up on. Not just teaching again, but connection. The kind I thought was forever beyond someone with my scars. Thomas remained silent, his gaze intent upon her face, neither pushing nor retreating from what hung unspoken between them. I'm not ready to give an answer about a more permanent arrangement, Sarah continued, but I'm not refusing the possibility either. I simply need time to establish myself here, to be certain of my own heart. Relief softened his features. Time is something I can offer freely. Pine Valley isn't going anywhere, and neither am I. Their quiet moment was interrupted by another knock. Benjamin Harris stood outside, clearly apologetic about the intrusion, but eager to show Sarah the schoolhouse as planned. Thomas took his leave with a promise to join them shortly after collecting some tools from his wagon. The schoolhouse stood at the eastern edge of the settlement, a modest wooden structure with a small bell tower, surrounded by a yard now overgrown with weeds. Inside, dust motes danced in shafts of sunlight that penetrated dirty windows. The furnishings were simple but sturdy, rows of rough-hewn desks facing a teacher's table, a slate board mounted on the wall, and a cast-iron stove for winter heating. "It needs a thorough cleaning," Benjamin acknowledged, watching Sarah's assessment of the space, "and some repairs to the roof before the summer rains, but it's solid at its core." "How many students would I have?" Sarah asked, already envisioning the room filled with young faces. 23 at last count, ranging from 6 to 14 years of age. Some have had formal schooling before, others barely know their letters. Benjamin hesitated. "I should mention, not all parents voted in your favor last night. Some may keep their children home, at least initially." The reminder of lingering opposition dampened Sarah's enthusiasm slightly, but she refused to let it overwhelm her determination. "They'll come around once they see results. Education is too valuable on the frontier to reject out of baseless fear." Benjamin smiled, clearly pleased by her resolve. "You sound like a proper teacher already." They discussed practical matters, books and supplies, the school term's schedule, compensation, modest but including lodging in a small room adjoining the classroom. By the time Thomas arrived with his toolbox, Sarah had already begun sweeping. Decades of dust from corners and planning how to arrange the space for optimal learning. The next several hours passed in shared labor. Thomas repaired broken window frames and loose floorboards, while Benjamin and Sarah cleared debris and organized salvageable materials. Other residents gradually joined them. Hannah Cooper brought lunch for the workers. Sheriff Caldwell delivered lumber for repairs. Even Pastor Thompson arrived with several parishioners to help clear the overgrown yard. This spontaneous community effort touched Sarah deeply. These people who had viewed her with suspicion and fear just days ago now worked alongside her toward a common purpose. Not everyone participated. Jenkins's closest allies were noticeably absent, but enough came to make the work progress rapidly. By mid-afternoon, the transformation was remarkable. Windows gleamed in the sunlight. Floors had been scrubbed to reveal honey-colored wood beneath years of grime, and the yard showed the beginnings of order. The roof still needed attention, but Thomas assured Sarah it would be sound before the next rainfall. "We'll have you ready to begin classes within a week," Benjamin declared with satisfaction. "I'll post notices tomorrow for parents to register their children." As workers began dispersing, Thomas drew Sarah aside. "I need to return to my cabin before dark, but I'll be back tomorrow to finish the roof." His voice lowered. "Be careful tonight. Jenkins isn't finished causing trouble." "I'll be fine," she assured him, though uncertainty flickered beneath her confident words. "The inn seems secure enough." Thomas looked unconvinced but didn't press the issue. "If you need anything at all, send word. I can be here quickly." His concern warmed her even as it highlighted the precariousness of her situation. Sarah watched him depart with mixed emotions. Gratitude for his unwavering support, anxiety about facing the night without his protective presence, and beneath both, a growing awareness of deeper feelings she wasn't yet ready to name. Evening descended over Pine Valley, bringing with it a hushed quality that seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. Sarah dined in the inn's common room, despite Hannah's offer of a private meal, deliberately making herself visible to the community. Some diners nodded politely, others avoided her gaze. Progress would come gradually, she reminded herself. Acceptance couldn't be forced or rushed. She retired early, exhausted from the day's physical labor. Sleep came quickly, but proved fitful, her dreams troubled by shadowy figures and Jenkins's threatening voice. She woke shortly after midnight, certain she'd heard something beyond normal night sounds. Sitting up in bed, Sarah listened intently, trying to identify what had disturbed her rest. A muffled crash from downstairs confirmed her unease. Something was happening in the inn below. Sarah rose quickly, pulling a shawl around her nightdress. Voices drifted up from the common room, angry, masculine, with the slurred edges of intoxication. One voice rose above others, unmistakably Jenkins's. "Where is she, the marked woman? We've come to escort her out of Pine Valley, for the community's protection, of course." Hannah's voice responded, firm, despite obvious fear. "This is my establishment, William Jenkins, and you're not welcome here at this hour." The town voted. Miss Mitchell stays. "The town was misled," came Jenkins's belligerent reply. "Some of us know better than to let disease take root among us." Sarah's heart pounded as she heard heavy footsteps on the stairs. They were coming. Before her, Jenkins and his supporters, emboldened by darkness and whiskey. She glanced frantically around the room, seeking escape or defense, finding neither. The window overlooked a steep drop to hard ground. The door had no lock strong enough to resist determined men. A sharp knock rattled her door. "Miss Mitchell," Jenkins called, false courtesy barely masking menace. "Time to leave Pine Valley. We've prepared transportation for you, free of charge even, very generous considering the circumstances." Sarah pressed back against the far wall, mind racing. Screaming would accomplish nothing in the isolated inn. Fighting was futile against multiple opponents, yet surrendering meant leaving everything she had fought to establish here. "Miss Mitchell," Jenkins called again, patience thinning. "Don't make this more difficult than necessary." The door handle turned, then rattled against resistance. Sarah had wedged a chair beneath it, a temporary barrier at best. "Break it down," Jenkins ordered someone. "She's barricaded herself." Wood splintered as something heavy slammed against the door. Sarah clutched Najoni's turquoise stone, its smooth surface cool against her palm. Another impact shook the frame. The barrier wouldn't hold much longer. Then, miraculously, new voices erupted from below, authoritative and sober. Sheriff Caldwell had arrived, apparently alerted by someone in the inn. "That's enough, Jenkins," his voice carried clearly. "Step away from that door immediately." "This doesn't concern you, Sheriff," Jenkins replied, though his tone had lost some confidence. "We're simply escorting an unwelcome visitor from our settlement." "By breaking into a woman's bedroom in the middle of the night?" Caldwell's disgust was evident. "That's not community protection, it's criminal behavior." Heavy footsteps ascended the stairs, and Sarah could picture the sheriff's determined approach. Relief weakened her knees, but she remained pressed against the wall, unwilling to trust in safety until Jenkins and his supporters were truly gone. "This isn't over," Jenkins hissed through the damaged door. "Next time, the sheriff won't arrive so conveniently." Footsteps retreated down the hallway, accompanied by the sheriff's stern warnings about disturbing the peace and threatening a community member. When silence finally returned, a gentle knock sounded at Sarah's door. "Miss Mitchell?" It was Hannah, voice shaking slightly. "They're gone. Sheriff Caldwell escorted them out." Sarah removed the chair and opened the door with trembling hands. Hannah stood outside, pale but composed, with Sheriff Caldwell beside her. "Are you harmed?" the sheriff asked, professional concern evident in his weathered features. "No," Sarah managed, though her voice sounded strained even to her own ears, "just frightened." "Understandable," Caldwell acknowledged grimly. "I'll have a deputy stationed outside the inn tonight, but we need to consider your safety going forward. Jenkins crossed a line tonight. one that could have ended very badly if my deputy hadn't spotted them gathering at the saloon and alerted me to their intentions. "What options do I have?" Sarah asked, gathering her composure with effort. "I won't be driven away, not after coming this far." The sheriff considered this. The schoolhouse has living quarters, but they're not ready yet, and it's isolated. Enough to be vulnerable. He rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "For tonight, you're safe here with my deputy watching. Tomorrow, we'll need a more permanent solution." After the sheriff departed, Hannah insisted on bringing tea to calm Sarah's nerves. They sat together in the common room, the normally bustling space eerily silent in the small hours of morning. "I've never seen Jenkins like this," Hannah admitted, her hands cupped around her own tea mug. "He's always been proud, even arrogant, but this borders on obsession. It's as though your presence challenges something fundamental to his position here." Sarah sipped the hot liquid, letting its warmth combat the chill of fear that lingered in her body. "Perhaps it does. He built his authority on being Pine Valley's protector. My insistence that I pose no threat, and the community's growing acceptance of that truth, undermines his power. Still, to resort to such tactics..." Hannah shook her head. "It suggests desperation, not just opposition." They fell silent, each contemplating the night's events from their own perspective. Eventually, exhaustion overcame anxiety, and Sarah returned to her room. Despite the deputy's presence outside, sleep remained elusive for the remainder of the night. Morning arrived with leaden skies threatening rain, a fitting match for Sarah's weary spirits. She dressed mechanically, mind occupied with practical concerns. The schoolhouse repairs would continue today, but her more pressing need was securing safe accommodations. The inn had proven vulnerable despite Hannah's goodwill. The schoolhouse quarters weren't yet habitable. Her options seemed limited to leaving Pine Valley, exactly what Jenkins wanted, or finding protection elsewhere within the settlement. Thomas arrived earlier than expected, his expression grave as Hannah explained the night's events. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, then deliberately relaxed. "You need a safer place to stay," he stated, the words carrying unmistakable tension. "Someplace Jenkins and his followers won't easily access. The obvious solution would be your cabin," Sarah replied carefully. "But that would only confirm the worst suspicions about my character." Thomas paced the small room, frustration evident in every movement. "Propriety seems a secondary concern when your safety is at risk." "On the contrary," Sarah countered, "my reputation is fundamental to my position as teacher. If parents believe me morally compromised, they'll never entrust their children to my care, regardless of whether I pose a health risk." Their impasse was interrupted by another arrival. Nijoni, looking distinctly out of place in the inn's common room with her traditional clothing and ceremonial adornments. Her presence immediately drew stares from the few breakfast patrons, but she ignored them, moving directly to Sarah with purposeful strides. "I felt your fear in the night," she stated without preamble. "The turquoise carries your spirit's voice to those who know how to listen." Sarah touched the stone at her throat, amazed. "You knew I was in danger." Not the details, but the feeling. Nijoni's dark eyes assessed Sarah carefully. The pale trader with angry eyes moves against you more quickly than expected. He fears what he cannot control. Thomas stepped forward. "Jenkins and his men tried to force Sarah from the inn last night. She needs safer lodging until the schoolhouse quarters are repaired." Nijoni nodded, as though this confirmed something she already knew. "She will come to Red Mesa." The declaration surprised both Sarah and Thomas. "Red Mesa?" Sarah echoed. "But that's..." "Perfect," Thomas interrupted, understanding dawning in his expression. "Jenkins would never follow you onto Navajo land. He's too much of a coward to venture that far from his supporters." and it would give you time to finish the schoolhouse repairs properly, make the living quarters secure. Sarah hesitated, torn between practical concerns and the unexpected invitation. Would your people truly welcome me, Nijoni? I don't wish to impose. The medicine woman's expression remained impassive. You carried the spotted sickness and lived. This gives you standing among my people. Some will fear your scars, others will respect the strength they represent, but none will harm you under my protection. The offer presented an elegant solution to Sarah's immediate dilemma. At Red Mesa, she would be beyond Jenkins's reach while maintaining the propriety necessary for her teaching position. Yet the prospect of immersing herself in an unfamiliar culture, already stretched beyond her usual boundaries, seemed daunting. How long would I stay? She asked. Until the school place is ready, Nijoni replied simply. 3 days, 4. The tall one knows building, can tell better than I. Thomas considered this. With dedicated work, we could have the living quarters habitable in 4 days, properly secure, with good locks and reinforced shutters. Sarah looked between them, grateful for the solution, yet aware of deeper currents beneath the practical arrangements. Nijoni's interest in her went beyond simple charity. The medicine woman saw something in Sarah's survival that held significance within her own cultural understanding, and Thomas's eagerness to accept Nijoni's offer revealed his deep concern for Sarah's safety, even at the cost of temporary separation. Very well, she decided finally. I accept your generous offer, Nijoni. But I'll need to gather my belongings and inform Sheriff Caldwell of my whereabouts, so he doesn't think I've fled. Preparations moved quickly after that. Thomas spoke with Benjamin Harris about accelerating repairs to the schoolhouse living quarters, while Sarah packed her modest possessions and wrote a brief note for Sheriff Caldwell explaining her temporary relocation. By mid-morning, they were ready to depart. Hannah watched their preparations with mixed emotion. It saddens me that Pine Valley couldn't offer you safety, she said, as Sarah prepared to leave. It reflects poorly on all of us. Not all, Sarah corrected gently. Many have shown extraordinary kindness. This is a temporary measure, nothing more. I'll return to take up my teaching position as planned. The journey to Red Mesa passed largely in silence, each traveler occupied with their own thoughts. Thomas drove the wagon with Sarah seated between him and Nijoni. The landscape grew increasingly rugged as they climbed toward the mesa, pine forests giving way to more dramatic rock formations and sparse vegetation. Sarah found herself studying Nijoni surreptitiously during the journey. The medicine woman projected an aura of calm certainty that seemed to exist independent of external circumstances. What would it be like, Sarah wondered, to carry such unshakable confidence, to interpret scars as badges of honor rather than marks of shame? Though they came from worlds that could scarcely be more different, Sarah felt a curious kinship with this woman who had first helped her see her survival in a new light. By early afternoon, they crested the final ridge, and Red Mesa spread before them, a small Navajo settlement nestled against dramatic red cliffs. Children were the first to spot their arrival, running alongside the wagon with uninhibited curiosity. Unlike the children in Boston or Pine Valley, they showed no fear or revulsion at Sarah's scarred appearance. Their innocent acceptance eased something tight within her chest. Thomas halted the wagon near the central clearing. I should return to Pine Valley, he said, though reluctance colored his tone. The schoolhouse repairs won't complete themselves, and your quarters need to be ready as quickly as possible. Sarah understood the practicality of his departure, yet found herself strangely unwilling to say goodbye. These past days had created a bond between them that transcended their unusual circumstances. The thought of facing the coming days without his steady presence felt unsettling. I'll come each day to update you on our progress, he promised, seeming to read her thoughts, and Nijoni will ensure your safety here. "I know," Sarah assured him, attempting a confidence she didn't entirely feel. "This is the right decision, practical and proper." Thomas's gaze lingered on her face, seeing beyond her forced certainty to the apprehension beneath. "You've faced worse than this, Sarah Mitchell. A few days among the Navajo may prove more blessing than hardship." As Thomas prepared to depart, an elderly Navajo man approached, clearly someone of significance within the community, judging by the respect shown by others. His deeply lined face suggested decades of sun and weather, while his bearing communicated dignity and authority. "Chief Many Horses," Nijoni explained, offering a respectful gesture which the elder acknowledged. With a slight nod, the chief studied Sarah with penetrating eyes, his gaze lingering on her scarred features. He spoke in Navajo to Nijoni, who translated for Sarah's benefit. "He says you carry the marks of a great battle, that your spirit must be strong to have defeated such an enemy. He welcomes you to Red Mesa and offers the protection of his people while you are here." Sarah inclined her head respectfully. "Please tell him I'm grateful for his generosity and will try to honor his people's customs during my stay." After Nijoni translated, the chief nodded approvingly and spoke again at greater length. "He says the white man's fear of sickness comes from ignorance of its spirit nature," Nijoni translated. "Our people know that some sicknesses are trials sent to test worthiness. Those who survive earn wisdom. Your scars show you passed such a test." The interpretation resonated with what Nijoni had told her during their first healing session, that her survival represented victory, not shame. Though Sarah didn't fully understand the Navajo spiritual framework, she appreciated the dignified acceptance it offered her. Here, at least, her scars marked her as someone who had faced death and prevailed, not as a source of fear or revulsion. As Thomas finally departed, promising to return the following day, Sarah watched his wagon descend the trail toward Pine Valley with mixed emotions. Part of her longed to go with him, to face whatever challenges Jenkins might present directly. Yet another part welcomed this unexpected sanctuary and the chance to experience the world through different eyes, if only briefly. Nijoni touched her arm gently. "Come, you will stay in my dwelling. There is much to learn if you are willing." The simple hogan felt surprisingly welcoming despite its unfamiliarity. Constructed of logs and earth with a smoke hole in the center, it offered protection from the elements while maintaining a connection to the natural world outside. Nijoni showed Sarah where to place her belongings and explained basic customs: how to enter respectfully, where to sit, which directions held particular significance. "Tonight, there will be singing," she explained as she arranged bedding for her guest. "For healing, for balance, you will join us." "Singing?" Sarah echoed, uncertainty evident in her voice. "I'm not sure I know." "Not to sing yourself," Nijoni clarified with a rare smile. "To listen, to learn. The songs help reconnect what has been separated, body from spirit, person from community, past from future." She looked directly at Sarah. "You have been disconnected too long, woman who survived. It is time to rejoin the circle." 3 days at Red Mesa transformed Sarah in ways she hadn't anticipated. The Navajo's matter-of-fact acceptance of her. Scars gradually eased the tension she habitually carried in her shoulders, the constant readiness for rejection or disgust. Here, children approached her openly, sometimes touching the marks on her face with innocent curiosity rather than fear. Elderly women nodded respectfully when she passed, recognizing something in her survival that their culture valued. Each evening brought singing ceremonies that stirred something profound within Sarah. Though she couldn't understand the Navajo words, the rhythmic chanting and drumming seemed to reach beyond language, to touch emotions long buried beneath shame. and isolation. She found herself weeping during one particularly moving ceremony, silent tears streaming down her scarred cheeks as something tight within her chest finally began to loosen. Nijoni watched this transformation with quiet satisfaction. "The songs are working," she observed on the third morning as they shared a simple breakfast. "Your spirit grows stronger." True to his word, Thomas visited daily, bringing news of the schoolhouse repairs. The living quarters were nearly complete, reinforced with sturdy locks and shutters that would withstand any attempts at forced entry. The news from Pine Valley was mixed. While many residents continued supporting Sarah's appointment as teacher, Jenkins had intensified his opposition, instituting a trade embargo against those who openly sided against him. "Benjamin Harris can't get supplies for his store," Thomas explained during his latest visit. "Jenkins has convinced the merchants in neighboring settlements not to sell to him. It's putting pressure on some of our allies." "He's punishing them for supporting me," Sarah said quietly, guilt stirring beneath her determination. "Perhaps I should—" "Don't say it," Thomas interrupted firmly. "Don't suggest leaving to spare others hardship. That's exactly what Jenkins wants, to make helping you so costly that people withdraw their support. But I never intended to cause such disruption." "You didn't cause it. Jenkins did." Thomas's expression softened slightly. "Besides, there's good news too. Dr. Peterson has written to the territorial governor about Jenkins' abuse of commercial power, and several families have already registered their children for school, despite everything." On the fourth day, Sarah helped Navajo women grind corn using traditional methods. A familiar wagon appeared on the trail from Pine Valley. Thomas was earlier than usual, and he wasn't alone. Dr. Peterson and Sheriff Caldwell accompanied him, their expressions suggesting urgent business. "What's happened?" Sarah asked as they approached, brushing cornmeal from her skirts. "Jenkins has gone too far," Sheriff Caldwell replied grimly. "Last night he and his supporters vandalized the schoolhouse, broke windows, damaged furniture, left threatening messages on the walls." Sarah gasped, hand flying to her throat where Nijoni's turquoise rested. "Was anyone hurt?" "No," Thomas assured her quickly. "But that's not all. Tell her, Doctor." Dr. Peterson stepped forward, his normally calm demeanor tense with controlled anger. "Jenkins is claiming there's been an outbreak of fever in a settlement 30 miles east, blaming travelers who allegedly had contact with you. It's completely fabricated, but he's using it to renew fears about contagion." "That's monstrous," Sarah whispered, shock giving way to indignation. "People could panic unnecessarily." "They already are," Caldwell confirmed. "Jenkins has convinced several families to leave Pine Valley temporarily for their safety. He's creating an exodus based on lies." Thomas's jaw tightened visibly. "We believe he's trying to force a crisis, either drive enough people away that Pine Valley cannot sustain itself, or create such fear that his supporters will take more drastic action against you." "What can we do?" Sarah asked, looking between the three men. "We need to end this," Dr. Peterson said firmly, "not just temporarily, but permanently. Jenkins's influence must be broken before he destroys what we've built in Pine Valley." "That's why we've come," Caldwell added. "We need to form a unified front, those who stand for truth against those who exploit fear. But we need you at the center, Miss Mitchell. Your courage in facing them directly could make the difference." Sarah glanced toward Nijoni, who had approached silently during their conversation. The medicine woman studied her thoughtfully before speaking. "The healing is not complete," she said, "but it has progressed enough. Your spirit is stronger now. It is time to face the man with angry eyes." The decision crystallized in Sarah's mind with surprising clarity. Running had never solved anything, not in Boston, not here. If Pine Valley was to become her home, if she was to reclaim the life and purpose she sought, this confrontation could not be avoided. "When do we leave?" she asked simply. Within the hour, Sarah had gathered her belongings and bid farewell to the Navajo community that had sheltered her. Chief Many Horses presented her with a small woven blanket, a gesture of respect that moved her deeply. Nijoni embraced her before departure, pressing additional herbs into her hands. "For courage," the medicine woman explained, "though you carry much already in your heart." The journey back to Pine Valley passed quickly, filled with strategy discussions. Their plan was straightforward: confront Jenkins publicly with evidence of his deceptions while demonstrating unified opposition to his tactics. Dr. Peterson had documented the falsity of the fever outbreak claims. Sheriff Caldwell had gathered statements about the schoolhouse vandalism. Benjamin Harris had tallied the economic damage from Jenkins's trade embargo. "We'll call an emergency town meeting," Caldwell explained. "Everyone must see this confrontation, the truth laid bare for all to witness." Pine Valley appeared unnaturally quiet as they approached, confirming that Jenkins's fear campaign had temporarily succeeded in driving some residents away. The main street held few people, and those visible moved quickly, heads down, as though avoiding contact with neighbors. They stopped first at the vandalized schoolhouse. Seeing the damage firsthand, shattered windows, overturned desks, hateful words scrawled across the slate board, Sarah felt a curious calm settle over her. This deliberate destruction represented everything she had fought against: fear corrupting into hatred, ignorance manifesting as violence. "We'll rebuild again," Thomas said quietly, standing beside her amid the wreckage, "as many times as necessary." "Yes," she agreed, touching a broken desk thoughtfully. "But first, we end this." Sheriff Caldwell rode through town, announcing an emergency meeting to address the current crisis. Curiosity drew people despite fear, and by late afternoon, the church was nearly as full as during the previous gathering. Jenkins sat prominently at the front, surrounded by his closest supporters, his expression changing from smug confidence to wary suspicion when Sarah entered with her allies. Pastor Thompson called the meeting to order, his voice strained by the tension pervading the room. "Friends and neighbors, we face difficult times. Sheriff Caldwell has requested this gathering to address concerns affecting our entire community." Caldwell stepped forward, his official capacity lending weight to his words. "Pine Valley stands at a crossroads. Fear has taken root among us, disrupting commerce, damaging property, and driving families from their homes." His gaze fixed directly on Jenkins. "Fear, deliberately cultivated based on lies and manipulation." Jenkins rose immediately, face blushing with anger. "How dare you accuse me? I've only sought to protect this settlement from disease, a responsibility others seem willing to abandon for sentiment's sake." "A noble claim," Dr. Peterson interjected, stepping forward with documents in hand. "If only it were true. I've confirmed with physicians in neighboring settlements. There is no fever outbreak as you've claimed, no illness whatsoever beyond the usual seasonal complaints." Murmurs rippled through the gathering as Peterson continued methodically, dismantling Jenkins's fabricated health crisis with medical facts and documented correspondence. The merchant's face darkened as his deception was exposed, but he remained defiant. "Even if there's no immediate outbreak, the risk remains," Jenkins insisted. "Her presence," he jabbed a finger towards Sarah, "is a constant reminder of disease, a walking monument to contagion that weakens our community's resolve." Sarah moved forward then, Nijoni's turquoise warm against her skin, the medicine woman's teachings steady in her mind. For the first time since contracting smallpox, she saw her scars not as disfigurements to be hidden, but as testimony to be offered. "What weakens a community, Mr. Jenkins, is not illness, but the fear that divides neighbor from neighbor," she said, her voice clear and carrying to every corner of the church. These marks you so despise represent survival, not threat. I lived when many died. That's not something to fear, it's something to recognize as the precious gift it is. She turned slightly, addressing the broader gathering rather than Jenkins directly. I came to Pine Valley seeking a fresh start, a chance to use my education to benefit your children. Instead, I found myself at the center of a struggle between fear and acceptance, between truth and deception. Some of you welcomed me despite your initial concerns. Others, her gaze returned briefly to Jenkins, saw opportunity in exploiting those concerns for personal advantage. Slander! Jenkins sputtered, but his protest lacked conviction as more townspeople began nodding in recognition of truth in Sarah's words. Thomas stepped forward, standing supportively at Sarah's side. It's not slander when it's demonstrably true. You vandalized the schoolhouse, Jenkins. You fabricated health scares. You punished merchants who refused to join your campaign against Miss Mitchell. These aren't actions of community protection. They're attempts to maintain control through fear. Benjamin Harris rose from his seat. I can no longer extend credit at my store because Jenkins has blocked my supply lines. Families are suffering because I supported Miss Mitchell's right to teach our children. How does that protect Pine Valley? More voices joined in, testimonies of Jenkins's retribution against those who had voted in Sarah's favor, accounts of his increasingly erratic behavior as his influence waned. The momentum shifted palpably as the community recognized the pattern of manipulation that had governed them for years, suddenly visible in the light of collective truth. Jenkins's face contorted with rage and desperation. You're all fools! She's bewitched you somehow, you and that Indian witch from Red Mesa. They're corrupting our Christian community with their savage ways. The only corruption here, Sheriff Caldwell stated firmly, is your willingness to destroy Pine Valley rather than relinquish control of it. That ends today. He turned to address the gathering. I propose a resolution. William Jenkins will cease his campaign against Miss Mitchell immediately, end all retaliatory actions against her supporters, and make restitution for damages to the schoolhouse. Failing this, he faces charges of vandalism, false reporting, and interfering with lawful commerce. Pastor Thompson, visibly relieved that order was being restored, called for a vote. The result was overwhelming. Even some who had previously supported Jenkins now recognized the destructive path he had chosen. The merchant stood isolated, his power broken by exposure to the very community he had manipulated. This isn't over, Jenkins hissed as he stormed toward the exit, a handful of die-hard supporters in his wake. Pine Valley will regret this day. No, Sarah replied quietly, though he likely didn't hear. Pine Valley will heal from this day. The following weeks brought gradual restoration. Jenkins departed for parts unknown rather than face the humiliation of diminished status, taking his closest allies with him. The schoolhouse was repaired once more, this time with the entire community participating. Sarah moved into the adjoining living quarters, now secure and comfortable, and began teaching Pine Valley's children as originally intended. To her surprise and gratification, the children adapted to her scarred appearance with remarkable ease. After initial curiosity, they simply accepted her as their teacher, more concerned with her knowledge and kindness than the marks on her face. Several parents who had initially kept their children home relented after hearing positive reports, further validating Sarah's position in the community. Though her days were filled with teaching, Sarah made regular journeys to Red Mesa, both to visit Nijoni and to foster connections between the communities. She began learning Navajo words and customs while sharing aspects of formal education, and that interested the Navajo children. These cultural exchanges, tentative at first, gradually strengthened into genuine appreciation on both sides. Thomas remained a steady presence in her life, respectful of her independence yet unfailing in his support. Their relationship deepened naturally without pressure or haste, building on the foundation of trust established during their initial trials together. When he finally proposed formally 6 months after her arrival in Pine Valley, Sarah accepted, without hesitation. Their wedding united more than just two individuals. Held in the schoolyard on a golden autumn afternoon, the ceremony brought together Pine Valley residents and Navajo guests from Red Mesa, including Nijoni and Chief Many Horses. Pastor Thompson officiated, his gentle words emphasizing how love transcends differences and healing requires courage from entire communities, not just individuals. As Sarah stood beside Thomas, she touched the scars on her face with newfound appreciation. These marks had brought her to Pine Valley, had connected her with Thomas and Nijoni, had ultimately forced an entire community to confront its fears and emerge stronger. What had once been her greatest shame had become the catalyst for her deepest joy. The spotted sickness marked you, Nijoni had told her that morning, helping her prepare for the ceremony. But you marked the world in return, changing it with your courage. This is the greater medicine. Standing now as Sarah Walker, facing a future bright with purpose and connection, she finally understood the truth of those words. Her scars were not a curse, but a story written on her skin. A story of survival, transformation, and the healing power of acceptance, both from others and, most importantly, from within. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.